Millionaire hired an actress to play his fiancée for a weekend event, but an unexpected confession changed everything. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. You cannot be serious about bringing that woman to the anniversary celebration. Brandon Hart set down his coffee cup with deliberate precision, watching the dark liquid ripple as his father's voice cut through the morning silence of the corporate boardroom. Across the mahogany table, Richard Hart stood with his back to the floor-to-ceiling windows, his silver hair catching the Manhattan sunlight like armor. Her name is Mackenzie, Dad. And yes, I am bringing her, a struggling actress. Richard turned, his weathered face a mask of controlled disapproval. Brandon, this family has maintained its reputation for 4 generations. Your grandmother built this company from nothing. Your mother and I have sacrificed everything to preserve what she created. And you want to parade some nobody from Queens in front of 300 of our closest associates? Brandon pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. At 38, he had learned to recognize the familiar tightness in his chest that preceded these conversations. The same suffocating pressure he had felt as a child when his father explained why he could not play with the neighborhood kids, why he could not choose his own friends, why his life belonged to the Hart legacy before it belonged to him. She is not a nobody, and she is going to be my wife. The words tasted strange in his mouth. 3 days ago, Mackenzie Barnes had been nothing more than a headshot on his assistant's desk and a desperate solution to an impossible problem. Now she was his shield against a lifetime of expectations he had never chosen. Richard's laugh was sharp and humorless. Your wife. You have known this girl for what? 2 weeks. Brandon, I raised you to be smarter than this. You raised me to be you. Brandon walked to the window, looking down at the bustling streets 40 floors below. Maybe that was the problem. The problem, Richard said, his voice dropping to the dangerous whisper that had intimidated board members and competitors for decades, is that you think you can walk away from your responsibilities, from your family, from everything I have built for you. Brandon had heard this speech before. The weight of inherited duty, the burden of family honor, the expectation that his life would be a carbon copy of his father's carefully orchestrated existence. A prestigious marriage to someone from their social circle, children raised by nannies while he worked 16-hour days, a house in the Hamptons that would host the same parties for the same people year after year until he died at his desk like his grandfather had. I'm not walking away from anything. I'm choosing my own path, with an actress from Queens, with the woman I love. The lie came easier this time. Brandon had practiced it in the mirror that morning, watching his reflection repeat the words until they sounded almost convincing. Mackenzie had coached him on the details during their brief meeting 2 days earlier. Her favorite color was blue. She grew up in Astoria. She had a younger brother in college. She dreamed of performing on Broadway, but had been waiting tables at a diner in Midtown to pay her rent. What she had not told him was how her eyes lit up when she talked about acting, or how she unconsciously tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear when she was nervous, or how she had stared at the contract for a full minute before signing it, her hand trembling slightly as she wrote her name. Love. Richard repeated the word like it was a foreign concept. Brandon, you are the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Love is a luxury you cannot afford. Maybe that is where we disagree. The door opened, and Miranda Hart entered with the silent grace that had made her a formidable hostess for 30 years. At 62, she still carried herself like the debutante who had captivated Richard Hart at a charity gala in 1983. But her blue eyes, so similar to Brandon's own, held a warmth that her husband had never possessed. "Good morning, darling," she said, kissing Brandon's cheek. "Richard, You are going to give yourself a heart attack if you keep pacing like that. Your son has lost his mind, Miranda. He wants to bring some actress to the anniversary celebration. Miranda settled into her chair with practiced elegance, her pearl necklace catching the light. I assume you're talking about Mackenzie. I'm looking forward to meeting her. Richard stared at his wife as if she had just suggested they burn down the estate. You cannot be serious. I am very serious. Brandon is 38 years old. Richard, he has given us 12 years of his life running this company. If he has found someone who makes him happy, then I support his choice. Brandon felt something loosen in his chest. A knot he had not realized was there. His mother had always been his ally in these battles, but her support still surprised him. Miranda, you have not met this girl. You have no idea what kind of person she is, what her motivations might be. I know that she makes our son smile. Miranda interrupted. I have not seen Brandon truly happy in years. If this young woman is responsible for the light in his eyes, then she is welcome in our home. Brandon caught his mother's gaze across the table. She was studying him with the perceptive intelligence that had made her an invaluable partner in his father's business dealings. He wondered if she could see through his carefully constructed facade, if she knew that the light in his eyes was nothing more than desperate relief at finding a way out of this weekend. The anniversary celebration is not just a family gathering, Richard continued. The Vanderbilts will be there, the Astors, Senator Morrison and his wife. These are not people who will be impressed by some nobody from Queens. Then it is a good thing Mackenzie is not trying to impress them, Brandon said. She will be there as my fiancée, not as a performer. Another lie. In 48 hours, Mackenzie Barnes would give the performance of her lifetime, and Brandon would pay her handsomely for it. Then they would part ways, and he would face the consequences of whatever story they had created together. Fiancée. Miranda's voice was carefully neutral, but Brandon caught the slight widening of her eyes. When did this happen? Brandon reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the small velvet box he had purchased the day before. Inside, a 2-carat diamond solitaire caught the morning light, throwing tiny rainbows across the boardroom table. He had chosen it quickly, efficiently, the same way he approached every business decision. Classic, elegant, appropriate for the role it would play. Last night, he said, I proposed, and she said yes. The box felt heavier than it should have in his palm. Somewhere across the city, Mackenzie Barnes was probably getting ready for her shift at the diner, serving coffee to construction workers and office assistants who tipped her in crumpled dollar bills. In a few hours, she would be wearing this ring and pretending it meant something. Miranda reached for the box with trembling fingers. When she opened it, her sharp intake of breath was audible across the room. Brandon, it is beautiful. Your grandmother would have loved it. She would have loved Mackenzie, he said, and for a moment he almost believed it himself. Richard slammed his hand against the window, the sound echoing through the room like a gunshot. This is insane. You have known this girl for 2 weeks, and now you want to marry her. What happens when you discover she is only interested in your money? What happens when the novelty wears off and you realize you have nothing in common? What happens to this company when your personal life becomes a public disaster? What happens when I finally stop living the life you planned for me and start living my own? The question hung in the air between them. 38 years of unspoken resentment. It crystallized into a single moment. Brandon had never challenged his father so directly, had never risked the fragile peace that existed between them. But the weight of the engagement ring in his mother's hands felt like a promise he was making to himself as much as to the woman who would wear it. Brandon, Miranda said softly, are you sure about this? Marriage is not something you can undo easily. He looked at his mother, seeing the genuine concern in her eyes. She wanted him to be happy, but she also understood the world they lived in, the expectations that came with their name and their wealth. A world where love was secondary to social standing, where marriages were strategic alliances rather than romantic partnerships. I have never been more sure of anything in my life. The lie was becoming easier with each repetition. Brandon could feel it settling into his bones, becoming part of the story he would tell himself and everyone else for the next 48 hours. He was not a man desperate enough to hire a stranger to solve his problems. He was not someone who would risk everything for a temporary escape from his father's control. He was simply a man in love, making the same choice millions of people made every day. "Then I suppose we need to discuss the arrangements," Miranda said, closing the ring box with a decisive snap. "The anniversary celebration is in 3 days. If Mackenzie is going to be part of this family, she needs to understand what that means." Richard turned from the window, his face a mask of cold fury. "Miranda, you cannot be serious about supporting this madness." "I am serious about supporting our son. And if you want to maintain any relationship with him, you will learn to be civil to the woman he has chosen to marry." Brandon watched his parents face each other across the boardroom. 30 years of marriage condensed into a single moment of silent communication. His father's jaw was clenched, his hands balled into fists at his sides. His mother sat perfectly still, her spine straight, her expression calm but implacable. "Fine," Richard said finally. "But do not expect me to pretend to be happy about this. And do not expect me to welcome her with open arms when she shows her true colors." "What if she never shows these true colors you are so worried about?" Brandon asked. "What if she is exactly who she appears to be?" Richard's smile was cold and knowing. "Son, I have been judging people's character for 40 years. Trust me when I tell you that everyone has a price. Everyone has an agenda. And everyone will disappoint you if you give them the chance." The words hit Brandon like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. He was living proof of his father's cynicism, standing in this boardroom planning an elaborate deception that would make his parents believe in a love that did not exist. He had found Mackenzie's price, $50,000, and a chance to escape her dead-end job for a weekend. His own price was higher but no less real, freedom from a future he had never wanted. "I think you would be surprised by people," Brandon said. "Sometimes they are better than you expect them to be, and sometimes they are exactly as disappointing as you feared. We will see which category your actress falls into." Miranda stood, smoothing her skirt with practiced movements. "That is enough, Richard. Brandon has made his choice, and we will respect it. Mackenzie is welcome in our home, and she will be treated as a member of this family." She handed the ring box back to Brandon, her fingers lingering for a moment against his palm. "When do we get to meet her?" "Tonight," Brandon said. "I thought we could have dinner, nothing formal, just the 4 of us." "Perfect. I will have Cook prepare something special." Miranda paused at the door, turning back to look at her son. "Brandon, I hope you know what you're doing." "So do I, Mom. So do I." After his parents left, Brandon stood alone in the boardroom, staring out at the city that had been his prison and his kingdom for 12 years. In a few hours, he would pick up Mackenzie Barnes and begin the performance that would either set him free or destroy everything he had worked to build. He pulled out his phone and dialed her number, listening to it ring once, twice, 3 times before her voice answered. "Hello? Mackenzie? It is Brandon. Are you ready for tonight?" There was a pause, and he could hear the sounds of the diner in the background, clinking dishes, muffled conversations, the hiss of the coffee machine. "As ready as someone can be to meet their fake future in-laws, I guess," Her honesty was refreshing after a morning of carefully constructed lies. Brandon found himself smiling for the first time all day. "They are going to love you." "You do not know that." "No," he admitted, "but I'm hoping they will." Another pause, longer this time. When Mackenzie spoke again, her voice was softer, more uncertain. "Brandon, what if we cannot pull this off? What if they see right through us?" The question he had been avoiding all morning hung between them, crackling through the phone connection like static electricity. What if his father was right? What if they were both in over their heads, playing a game they did not understand, with stakes higher than either of them had imagined? "Then we figure it out together," he said finally. "That is what partners do, right?" "Partners," she repeated, and he could hear something in her voice that might have been relief. "Yeah, I guess that is what we are. I will pick you up at 6. Wear something nice, but not too formal. My mother appreciates understated elegance." Understated elegance. Got it. Mackenzie paused. "Brandon." "Yeah? Thank you for this opportunity. I know it sounds crazy, but this weekend might change my life." Brandon closed his eyes, feeling the weight of her gratitude like a stone in his chest. She thought he was giving her something, but the truth was more complicated. They were both using each other, both desperate enough to risk everything for 48 hours of pretense. "Mine too," he said. "I will see you tonight." After he hung up, Brandon remained at the window for a long time, watching the people far below navigate their lives with what appeared to be effortless certainty. In a few hours, he would pick up a woman he barely knew and ask her to convince his family that their relationship was real. The success of their performance would determine not just the course of his weekend, but possibly the direction of his entire future. He thought about his father's words, about the price everyone supposedly had, about the disappointment that waited for anyone foolish enough to believe in something better. Maybe Richard Hart was right. Maybe everyone was motivated by self-interest. Maybe love was a luxury Brandon could not afford. Maybe this entire plan was doomed to fail. But as he stood there, watching the sun set over Manhattan, Brandon realized he was willing to find out. For 48 hours, he would pretend to be a man in love, and maybe, if he was very lucky, pretending would be enough. The engagement ring felt solid and real in his jacket pocket, a tangible reminder of the role he was about to play. In a few hours, he would slip it onto Mackenzie Barnes's finger and ask her to become someone she was not. The irony was not lost on him. He had been asking himself to do the same thing for 38 years. At exactly 6 o'clock, Brandon pulled up in front of the small apartment building in Astoria where Mackenzie lived. The neighborhood was a far cry from the Upper East Side penthouse he called home, but there was something honest about the tree-lined streets and modest buildings that appealed to him. People here worked for their rent money, worried about grocery bills, made difficult choices every day about what they could and could not afford. He climbed the 3 flights of stairs to apartment 4B, his footsteps echoing in the narrow hallway. When he knocked, the door opened immediately, as if she had been waiting just on the other side. Mackenzie Barnes took his breath away. She was wearing a simple black dress that hugged her curves without being inappropriate, her auburn hair swept up in an elegant chignon that revealed the graceful line of her neck. Her makeup was subtle but expertly applied, emphasizing her green eyes and the natural beauty he had only glimpsed during their brief business meeting 3 days earlier. "You look beautiful," he said, and meant it. "Thank you." She gestured to her outfit with a nervous laugh. "I borrowed the dress from my roommate. She works at Bergdorf's, so she has access to things I could never afford." The casual admission of her financial situation hit Brandon harder than he expected. He was about to pay this woman $50,000 to spend a weekend with him, money that would probably change her life in ways he could barely comprehend. For him, it was a business expense. For her, it was everything. "Are you ready for this?" he asked. Mackenzie picked up a small clutch purse from the table by the door, her movements precise and controlled. But Brandon noticed the slight tremor in her hands, the way she took a deep breath before turning to face him. "I think so. I have been practicing." "Practicing what?" "Being in love with you." The words hung between them, honest and vulnerable in a way that made Brandon's chest tighten. He realized that while he had been focused on the logistics of their arrangement, the ring, the backstory, the family dynamics, Mackenzie had been preparing for something much more complex. She was an actress, and she understood that convincing performance required emotional truth, even when that truth was manufactured. "How do you practice something like that?" he asked. Mackenzie smiled, and for the first time since he had met her, she looked genuinely relaxed. "I imagine what it would be like to fall in love with someone like you. Successful, confident, handsome. Someone who could give me everything I ever wanted, but who needs something from me that money cannot buy. What do I need from you?" "Permission to be yourself." The answer surprised him with its accuracy. Brandon stared at this woman he barely knew, wondering how she had seen so clearly what he had been trying to hide from everyone, including himself. "That is very perceptive. It is my job to understand people, to figure out what motivates them, what they are afraid of, what they want more than anything else in the world." Mackenzie stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something light and floral that suited her perfectly. "The question is, do you know what you want?" Brandon looked down at her, studying the intelligence in her green eyes, the determined set of her jaw, the way she held herself like someone who had learned not to expect too much from life but had never stopped hoping for more. "I want to be free," he said quietly, "from expectations, from obligations, from a future that was planned for me before I was old enough to have opinions about it. I want to make my own choices, even if they are mistakes. And you think 48 hours of pretending will give you that freedom? I think 48 hours of pretending might show me what real freedom looks like. And maybe that will be enough to help me figure out how to find it for myself." Mackenzie nodded slowly, as if his answer made perfect sense to her. "Then let us go show your parents how free you can be." The drive to his parents' house on the Upper East Side took 30 minutes in Friday evening traffic. Brandon had expected the trip to be awkward, filled with last-minute coaching about their cover story and nervous small talk about the evening ahead. Instead, they talked about everything except their arrangement. Mackenzie told him about growing up in Queens with a single mother who worked 2 jobs to support her and her younger brother. About dance classes she could not afford and school plays that ignited her passion for performing. About the day she decided to move to Manhattan and pursue acting, despite having no connections, no money, and no backup plan. Brandon found himself sharing stories he had never told anyone. About the loneliness of growing up wealthy, surrounded by people who were paid to take care of him, but who never really knew him. About his secret dream of becoming a teacher, and how his father had crushed that ambition before it could take root. About the weight of inheriting a company he had never wanted to run. "Do you ever think about walking away?" Mackenzie asked as they stopped at a red light near Central Park. "Every day. But it is not that simple. This company employs 8,000 people. My decisions affect their families, their futures. I cannot just abandon that responsibility because I am unhappy. What if you could find someone else to run it? Someone better suited for the job." "Like who?" "I do not know. But maybe the answer is not to destroy what your family built, but to find a way to preserve it while still living your own life." Brandon glanced at her, struck by the thoughtfulness of her response. Most people either told him he was lucky to have inherited so much wealth, or they advised him to walk away without considering the consequences. Mackenzie was the first person to suggest there might be a middle path. "You would make a good consultant," he said. "I would make a terrible consultant. I have no business experience and no money management skills, but I do know what it is like to feel trapped by circumstances you did not choose. And I know that sometimes the only way out is to change the rules of the game. Is that what we are doing tonight? Changing the rules?" Mackenzie turned to look at him, her expression serious in the glow of the streetlights. "I think we are doing something much more dangerous than that." "What?" "I think we are trying to figure out who we really are when no one is watching." They pulled up in front of his parents' townhouse, just as the last light was fading from the sky. The 4-story brownstone had been in the Hart family for 3 generations, its limestone facade and wrought iron balconies representing everything Brandon had been raised to value: tradition, stability, the kind of old money that never had to announce itself. "Impressive," Mackenzie said, studying the building with professional interest. "Very Upper East Side dynasty. Your character definitely grew up here." "My character. The version of you that I am in love with. I need to understand his background, his family dynamics, what shaped him into the man who would capture my heart." Brandon realized she was still working, still preparing for the performance ahead. The woman who had been talking to him in the car, honest, perceptive, genuinely interested in his thoughts and feelings, was sliding back into the role of actress preparing for an audition. "What if the version of me you are in love with is not that different from the real me?" he asked. Mackenzie paused with her hand on the car door handle, turning to meet his gaze. "Then we might be in more trouble than either of us realized." Before he could ask what she meant, she was out of the car and walking toward the front door, her posture transforming as she moved. Gone was the nervous woman who had admitted to borrowing her dress from a roommate. In her place was someone confident, elegant, completely at ease with the wealth and privilege surrounding her. Brandon caught up with her on the front steps, pulling out his key to unlock the door. "Ready?" "As ready as I will ever be to meet the parents of the man I am going to marry." The front door opened before Brandon could turn his key, revealing Miranda Hart in a blue silk dress that perfectly complemented her silver hair. She had been watching for them, probably from the front window, as eager to meet Mackenzie as she was nervous about this dinner. "Brandon, darling," she said, kissing his cheek before turning expectant eyes to Mackenzie. "Mom, I would like you to meet Mackenzie Barnes." Brandon slipped his arm around Mackenzie's waist, feeling her tense slightly before melting into his embrace. "Mackenzie, this is my mother, Miranda Hart. Mrs. Hart, it is such a pleasure to meet you." Mackenzie extended her hand with a warm smile that seemed entirely genuine. "Brandon has told me so much about you." "All good things, I hope." Miranda took Mackenzie's hand in both of hers, studying the younger woman's face with the same intensity Brandon had noticed in the boardroom that morning. "And please, call me Miranda. We are going to be family after all." "Thank you. That means more to me than you know." Miranda led them into the formal living room, where Richard Hart stood near the fireplace with a glass of scotch in his hand. He had changed from his business suit into a navy blazer and grey slacks, but his expression remained as cold and assessing as it had been that morning. "Richard, come meet Mackenzie," Miranda called. Brandon's father approached with the measured steps of a man evaluating a potential threat. When he reached Mackenzie, he extended his hand with the mechanical politeness he reserved for business associates he did not trust. "Miss Barnes, welcome to our home." "Mr. Hart, thank you for having me. Your home is beautiful." It has been in our family for 80 years. Brandon's great-grandmother purchased it after the stock market crash, when many people were forced to sell their assets at a significant loss. The comment was designed to make Mackenzie uncomfortable, to remind her of the vast difference between their backgrounds. Brandon felt his jaw clench, but Mackenzie did not flinch. How wise of her to recognize an opportunity when others saw only crisis. That kind of vision must run in the family. Richard's eyebrows rose slightly, as if he had not expected such a composed response. Indeed, Brandon tells us you are an actress. I am, though I suppose aspiring actress would be more accurate at this point in my career. How refreshing. Honesty is so rare these days. The backhanded compliment hung in the air like smoke. Brandon started to speak, but Mackenzie placed a gentle hand on his arm, a gesture so natural and affectionate that for a moment he forgot it was part of their performance. I find that honesty is usually the best policy, especially with people you hope to know for a long time. And how long do you hope to know us, Miss Barnes? For the rest of my life, if I am lucky enough to marry your son. The answer was perfect, confident without being presumptuous, heartfelt without being overly sentimental. Brandon watched his father process her words, looking for the calculation behind them, the angle she was working. "Dinner is served," announced Mrs. Chen, the family's housekeeper, appearing in the doorway with impeccable timing. The dining room had been set with the good china, crystal stemware catching the light from the chandelier overhead. Miranda had clearly gone to considerable effort to make this dinner special, and Brandon felt a surge of gratitude for his mother's unfailing grace. As they took their seats, Brandon pulled out Mackenzie's chair, his hand briefly touching her shoulder. She looked up at him with a smile that seemed to contain genuine warmth, and for a moment he forgot that this was all an elaborate performance. "So, Mackenzie," Miranda began as the first course was served, "tell us how you and Brandon met." Brandon felt his pulse quicken. They had discussed this part of their story, but hearing it spoken aloud in front of his parents felt different, more dangerous somehow. "It was completely by chance," Mackenzie said, her voice carrying just the right note of fond remembrance. "I was having the worst day. I had just gotten rejected for a role I really wanted. It was pouring rain, and I could not get a taxi to save my life. I was standing on the corner of 57th and Lexington, completely soaked, when this black sedan pulled up." She glanced at Brandon, including him in the story with a look that seemed genuinely affectionate. The window rolled down, and this handsome stranger asked if I needed a ride. My mother always told me never to get in cars with strangers, but something about him seemed trustworthy. Maybe it was the fact that he was wearing a $1,000 suit and driving a car that cost more than I make in 5 years. Richard leaned forward slightly. "You got into a car with a complete stranger. I know it sounds crazy, but Brandon had this way of looking at me, like he could see something in me that I could not see in myself. And honestly, I was so miserable that even being kidnapped seemed preferable to standing in the rain." "What happened next?" Miranda asked, clearly charmed by the story. "We talked the entire drive to my apartment, about everything and nothing, books, movies, dreams we had given up on, dreams we were still chasing. By the time we got to my building, I felt like I had known him my entire life." Brandon watched his mother's face soften as Mackenzie spoke. This was exactly the kind of romantic story Miranda would love. Chance encounters, instant connections, the kind of fairy tale beginning she probably wished she had experienced with Richard. "And when did you know you were in love?" Miranda asked. Mackenzie was quiet for a long moment, as if considering the question carefully. When she spoke, her voice was softer, more intimate. "It was not a single moment. It was 1,000 small moments. The way he listened when I talked about my dreams, even the ones that seemed impossible. The way he made me laugh when I was convinced my life was falling apart. The way he looked at me like I was the most interesting person in the room, even when the room was full of people much more successful and accomplished than I am. She turned to look at Brandon, and something in her expression made his breath catch. For just a moment, she was not acting. For just a moment, she was describing something real, something that existed between them, despite the artificial circumstances that had brought them together. The way he made me want to be the best version of myself, she finished quietly. The table was silent for several heartbeats, the weight of her words settling over the dinner like a benediction. Even Richard seemed momentarily disarmed by the sincerity in her voice. "That is beautiful, dear," Miranda said finally. "Richard, do you remember when you knew you were in love with me?" Brandon's father cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. "It was a long time ago, Miranda. It was at the Whitmore Charity Gala. You had been trying to get my attention all evening, but I was deliberately ignoring you because I thought you were arrogant." "You were not wrong about that," Richard admitted with a rare smile. "But then you did something that completely surprised me. You noticed that old Mrs. Patterson was sitting alone at her table, looking lost and forgotten. Without anyone asking, without any fanfare, you went over and sat with her for the rest of the evening. You made her feel important, included. That was when I knew there was more to you than the intimidating businessman everyone else saw." Brandon watched his parents share a look across the table. 30 years of marriage condensed into a moment of silent communication. He realized he had never heard this story before, had never known there was a time when his father was capable of such simple kindness. "People are often more complicated than they appear on the surface," Mackenzie said quietly. "The best relationships happen when two people see past each other's defenses to the person hiding underneath." "Is that what you and Brandon have found in each other?" Richard asked, his tone less hostile than it had been all evening. "I think so. I hope so." Mackenzie reached across the table and took Brandon's hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "Brandon sees me not as I am now, but as I could become. And I see him not as the person everyone expects him to be, but as the man he actually is when no one is watching." Brandon felt the warmth of her hand in his, the gentle pressure of her fingers against his palm. Such a simple gesture, but it sent electricity up his arm and straight to his chest. He looked down at their joined hands, struck by how natural it felt, how right. "And what kind of man is that?" Miranda asked gently. Mackenzie was quiet for a moment, her thumb tracing small circles on the back of Brandon's hand. When she spoke, her voice was filled with a certainty that surprised him. "He is kind, thoughtful. He carries the weight of other people's expectations, but he has never lost sight of his own moral compass. He would rather sacrifice his own happiness than hurt someone he cares about. He's exactly the kind of man any woman would be lucky to love." Brandon stared at her, stunned by the accuracy of her assessment. She had known him for 3 days, but somehow she had seen things about him that people who had known him for years had missed. "You are going to make me cry," Miranda said, dabbing at her eyes with her napkin. "Richard, are you not proud of the man our son has become?" Richard Hart studied his son across the dinner table, his expression unreadable. Finally, he raised his glass of wine. "To Brandon and Mackenzie, may you find in each other everything you are looking for." It was not the warm endorsement Miranda had been hoping for, but it was progress. Brandon raised his own glass, meeting Mackenzie's eyes as they toasted their fictional future. "To second chances," he said quietly. "To taking risks," Mackenzie added. They drank, and Brandon felt the wine burn slightly as it went down. Everything about this evening felt surreal. The easy conversation, his parents' gradual acceptance of Mackenzie, the way she had slipped so naturally into the role of his fiancée. Most unsettling of all was how much he was enjoying her company, how much he looked forward to her responses to his parents' questions, how proud he felt when she charmed them with her intelligence and grace. After dinner, Miranda insisted on showing Mackenzie the family photo albums, leading her to the living room while the men cleared the table. Brandon found himself alone with his father for the first time since that morning's confrontation. "She is not what I expected," Richard said, loading plates into the dishwasher with efficient movements. "What did you expect?" "Someone more obviously opportunistic, someone who would make it easier for me to dislike her." Brandon paused in his task of wrapping leftover food. "Do you dislike her?" Richard was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the same intensity he brought to complex business negotiations. "No," he said finally, "I do not dislike her. That troubles me more than if I did. Why? Because it means either she is an exceptionally talented actress or she genuinely cares about you. Either possibility complicates things considerably." Brandon set down the container he was holding, turning to face his father fully. "What if she genuinely cares about me? Would that be so terrible? It would mean I was wrong about her motivations. And if I was wrong about that, I might be wrong about other things as well." "Like what?" Richard closed the dishwasher and leaned against the counter, suddenly looking older than his 65 years. "Like whether you are capable of making your own decisions about your life. Like whether the future I planned for you is the future you actually want." The admission hung between them, more honest than any conversation they had shared in years. Brandon realized his father was struggling with the same questions that had been haunting him, questions about duty and desire, about the difference between what was expected and what was needed. "Dad, Brandon, can you come here for a moment?" Miranda's voice carried from the living room, interrupting whatever his father had been about to say. When Brandon entered the living room, he found Mackenzie and his mother sitting close together on the sofa, a photo album open between them. Mackenzie was laughing at something Miranda had said, her face bright with genuine amusement. "Your mother was just telling me about your infamous attempt to run away from home when you were 8, Mackenzie said, grinning up at him. "You made it 3 blocks before you realized you had forgotten to pack food," Miranda added. "You came home because you were hungry." "I was a very impractical runaway," Brandon admitted, settling into the chair beside the sofa. "Where were you planning to go?" Mackenzie asked. "Anywhere that was not here." "I had this fantasy about living in the woods, surviving off berries and stream water, completely free from rules and expectations." "What changed your mind? Besides the hunger?" Brandon thought about the question, remembering that long ago afternoon when he had sat on a park bench 3 blocks from home, clutching his backpack and trying to work up the courage to keep walking. "I realized I did not actually want to be alone. I wanted to be understood." "There is a difference." Mackenzie's expression grew thoughtful. "Do you feel understood now?" The question was clearly part of their performance, designed to give him an opportunity to talk about their relationship in front of his parents. But something in her tone suggested she was genuinely curious about his answer. "More than I have in a long time," he said honestly. Miranda closed the photo album and stood, smoothing her skirt. "I think it is time for Richard and me to let you young people have some time alone. Mackenzie, it has been such a pleasure meeting you." "The pleasure was mine. Thank you for welcoming me into your home." "You are welcome here anytime, dear. This is going to be your family too." After his parents said their goodbyes and disappeared upstairs, Brandon and Mackenzie found themselves alone in the living room. The sudden silence felt charged with unspoken thoughts and carefully controlled emotions. "That went well," Mackenzie said finally. "Better than well. You were incredible. My mother adores you. And your father." "My father is trying very hard not to like you, which means he probably already does," Mackenzie laughed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear in the gesture he was beginning to recognize as a nervous habit. "I should probably head home. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." Tomorrow, the anniversary celebration, where they would perform for 300 guests instead of just his parents, where the stakes would be higher and the margin for error smaller. Mackenzie, about tomorrow. "We will be fine," she said, standing and smoothing her borrowed dress. "We work well together. Did you notice how natural that felt?" Brandon had noticed. He had noticed the way she had anticipated his responses, the way she had supported his answers while adding her own insights, the way they had moved together like partners in a carefully choreographed dance. "It did feel natural," he agreed. "Good. Because tomorrow we need to convince a lot more people that we are head over heels in love." She said it lightly, as if it were just another acting challenge, but something in her eyes suggested the task ahead felt as daunting to her as it did to him. Brandon walked her to the door, helping her with her coat in a gesture that felt both chivalrous and intimate. As she turned to say goodbye, he caught her hand, stopping her for a moment. "Mackenzie, thank you. For tonight, for this whole arrangement. I know it is not easy, pretending to care about someone you barely know." She looked down at their joined hands, her expression unreadable. When she met his eyes again, her smile was soft but complicated. "Who says I am pretending?" Before he could respond, she was gone, leaving him standing in the doorway with the echo of her words and the lingering scent of her perfume. Brandon closed the door and leaned against it, trying to process what had just happened. The evening had been a success by any measure. His parents liked Mackenzie. She had handled their questions with grace and intelligence, and they had managed to convince two very skeptical people that their relationship was real. But somewhere in the middle of the performance, the lines between fiction and reality had begun to blur. Brandon thought about the way Mackenzie had described falling in love with him, the sincerity in her voice when she talked about seeing him for who he really was. He thought about her hand in his during dinner, the easy way they had supported each other's stories, the moment when she had looked at him and he had forgotten they were acting. Most troubling of all, he thought about her final words. "Who says I am pretending?" Had she meant it, or was she such a skilled actress that she could make even him believe in the role she was playing? Brandon realized he was in dangerous territory, developing real feelings for a woman who was being paid to fake them. But as he climbed the stairs to his childhood bedroom, he found he did not care about the danger. For the first time in years, he felt alive. For the first time in his adult life, he was looking forward to tomorrow instead of dreading it. And if that was the result of an elaborate performance, then maybe the performance was worth whatever it ultimately cost him. Tomorrow, he would stand beside Mackenzie Barnes in front of 300 guests and pretend to be engaged to her. Tomorrow, he would risk everything on the chance that 48 hours of fiction might lead to something real. But tonight, he would fall asleep thinking about the way she had looked at him across the dinner table and the possibility that some of the best things in life began with the most beautiful lies. The morning of the anniversary celebration dawned grey and drizzly, the kind of October day that seemed designed to match Brandon's mounting anxiety. He stood at the window of his childhood bedroom, watching raindrops race down the glass, while his mind raced through everything that could go wrong in the next 12 hours. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from Mackenzie. "Nervous, me too, but we've got this." The simple message steadied him more than it should have. Brandon typed back, "See you at noon." "You ready to be the center of attention?" As ready as I'll ever be to convince 300 people I'm marrying a millionaire. No pressure. Despite his nerves, Brandon found himself smiling. Mackenzie's honesty about their situation was refreshing after years of navigating conversations filled with subtext and hidden agendas. With her, he always knew exactly where he stood. Another text arrived. Question: should I be insulted that you think you need to pay someone to fall in love with you? Brandon stared at the message for a long moment, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. The question hit closer to home than she probably realized. He had been asking himself the same thing since the moment he had signed their contract. Maybe I just needed to pay someone to give me a chance, he typed back. The response came quickly. For what it's worth, I think you're underestimating yourself. Before he could analyze what that meant, his mother's voice echoed up the stairs. Brandon, breakfast! The Hart family kitchen was bustling with controlled chaos. Miranda directed the catering staff with the efficiency of a military commander, while Richard sat at the breakfast bar, reviewing his notes for the speech he would give that evening. 3 generations of Hart family history would be celebrated tonight, and the weight of that legacy seemed to press down on everyone in the room. Good morning, darling, Miranda said, kissing Brandon's cheek. How did you sleep? Fine, he lied. He had spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, alternating between excitement and terror about the day ahead. The florists will be here at 9, the musicians at 10. The tent people finished setting up last night, but I want to do a final walkthrough before the guests arrive. Miranda paused in her recitation, studying her son's face. You look pale. Are you feeling all right? Just nervous about tonight? There is nothing to be nervous about. It is a family celebration, not a performance. Brandon almost laughed at the irony. Tonight would be nothing but a performance, the most important one of his life. Where is Mackenzie getting ready? Miranda asked. I thought she might want to use the guest room upstairs. It has better lighting for makeup. She is getting ready at her apartment. She will be here by noon. I am looking forward to seeing her again. Such a lovely girl. Miranda lowered her voice conspiratorially. I think she is exactly what you need. If only she knew how right she was, Brandon thought. Mackenzie was exactly what he needed, not necessarily as a wife, but as a partner in this elaborate deception that might finally give him the freedom to live his own life. Richard looked up from his notes. Have you given any thought to the announcement? What announcement? Your engagement. The guests will be expecting some sort of formal announcement tonight. It is traditional. Brandon felt his stomach clench. He'd been so focused on getting through dinner with his parents that he had not thought about the public nature of tonight's event. 300 people, many of whom had known him since childhood, would be watching his every interaction with Mackenzie. I thought we would keep it low-key, he said carefully. Low-key, Richard's eyebrows rose. Son, this is the social event of the season. Everyone who is anyone will be there. If you are serious about marrying this girl, tonight is the perfect opportunity to make it official. Your father is right, Miranda added. We should announce the engagement properly. I can have the musicians play something special, maybe after your father's speech. Brandon nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The scope of what he and Mackenzie were attempting was becoming clearer by the minute. It was one thing to fool his parents over dinner. It was another entirely to convince 300 guests at a formal celebration. At exactly noon, a town car pulled up the circular driveway. Brandon watched from the front window as Mackenzie emerged, and his breath caught in his throat. She was wearing a deep emerald gown that brought out the color of her eyes, the fabric flowing around her like water as she moved. Her hair was styled in an elegant updo that showcased her graceful neck and the delicate earrings she wore. She looked every inch the sophisticated society woman, born to this world of wealth and privilege, but it was more than her appearance that struck him. It was the way she carried herself, confident, poised, completely at ease with the grandeur surrounding her. If he had not known better, he would have assumed she had been attending events like this her entire life. Brandon opened the door before she could knock, drinking in the sight of her on his doorstep. "You look stunning," he said, and meant it. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself." He was wearing a classic black tuxedo, perfectly tailored and appropriate for the formal evening ahead. But under Mackenzie's appreciative gaze, he felt more handsome and confident than he had in years. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, offering her his arm. As ready as anyone can be to attend their first high society event as the fake fiancée of a millionaire. She took his arm, her fingers curling around his elbow in a gesture that felt natural and right. "What's the plan?" "Survive the next 8 hours without anyone figuring out we met 4 days ago." "Piece of cake," Mackenzie said with a grin that did not quite hide her nervousness. Miranda appeared in the doorway, resplendent in a silver gown that had probably cost more than Mackenzie made in 6 months. Her face lit up when she saw the younger woman. "Mackenzie, you look absolutely radiant. That color is perfect on you." "Thank you, Miranda. You look beautiful as well. Come, let me show you around before the guests arrive. You should be familiar with our home if you are going to be part of the family." For the next hour, Miranda led them through a tour of the Hart estate. The family had purchased the Hampton property in the 1920s, and every room told a story of American wealth and influence. Oil paintings by famous artists, furniture that had belonged to presidents, books signed by Nobel Prize winners. Brandon watched Mackenzie take it all in, noting how she asked intelligent questions about the art and antiques, how she listened with genuine interest to his mother's stories about family history. She was not intimidated by the display of wealth. Instead, she seemed fascinated by the human stories behind the objects. "This is where Brandon had his 10th birthday party," Miranda said, as they walked through the garden. "He insisted on having a treasure hunt instead of the usual formal affair. We hid clues all over the grounds." "Did you find all the treasure?" Mackenzie asked Brandon. "Most of it. There is probably still a plastic sword buried somewhere near the rose garden." "He was such an imaginative child," Miranda continued, "always creating elaborate games and adventures. I think that is why he understands people so well now. He never lost that ability to see the world as a place full of possibilities." Brandon felt Mackenzie's hand tighten on his arm, and when he looked down at her, something in her expression had changed. She was looking at him with what appeared to be genuine affection, as if his mother's words had revealed something about him that she found endearing. "I can picture that," she said softly. "The boy who wanted to run away to the woods, creating treasure hunts in his own backyard. The guests will start arriving soon," Miranda announced, checking her watch. "I should go make sure everything is ready. Mackenzie, if you need anything at all, please do not hesitate to ask." After Miranda left, Brandon and Mackenzie found themselves alone in the garden. The rain had stopped, but the air still held the damp, earthy scent of autumn. In a few hours, this space would be filled with hundreds of people, but for now, it was just the two of them surrounded by flowers and the lingering silence of their shared performance. "Your mother is wonderful," Mackenzie said. "She likes you. A lot." "The feeling is mutual." Mackenzie turned to face him, her expression serious. "Brandon, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "What? Are you having second thoughts about this? Because if you are, we need to figure out an exit strategy before 300 people see us together." The question surprised him. In all his worrying about the evening ahead, he had never considered backing out entirely. "Are you having second thoughts?" he asked instead of answering. "I asked you first." Brandon studied her face, looking for signs of the nervousness he was feeling, but Mackenzie appeared calm, resolved, ready for whatever the evening would bring. "No," he said finally, "I'm not having second thoughts. What we are doing might be crazy, but it feels right. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Mackenzie smiled, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Because I am not having second thoughts either. In fact, I'm starting to think this might be the best decision either of us has ever made, even though it is completely insane, especially because it is completely insane." The sound of car doors slamming echoed from the front of the house, followed by the rise and fall of voices. The first guests were arriving. "This is it," Brandon said. "This is it." Mackenzie straightened her shoulders, transforming once again into the poised, confident woman who belonged in this world, ready to fall in love with me in front of 300 witnesses. "I think I might be getting a head start on that," Brandon said quietly. The words were out before he could stop them, more honest than he had intended to be. Mackenzie's eyes widened, and for a moment neither of them moved. "Brandon! Mackenzie! There you are!" Miranda's voice carried across the garden. "Come meet the Ashfords. They are dying to hear about your engagement." The moment was broken, but the words hung between them as they walked back toward the house. Brandon had not meant to admit how much his feelings had changed over the past few days, but he could not regret the honesty. Whatever happened tonight, at least Mackenzie would know that some of what she was seeing from him was real. The next 3 hours passed in a blur of introductions, small talk, and carefully orchestrated charm. Brandon had attended dozens of events like this throughout his life, but tonight felt different. Tonight, he had Mackenzie beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her laughter punctuating conversations with people who had known him since childhood. She was extraordinary. She remembered names instantly, asked thoughtful questions about people's work and families, and somehow made everyone feel like the most interesting person in the room. But more than that, she made Brandon feel like a better version of himself. With her beside him, he was funnier, more relaxed, more genuinely engaged with the people around him. "You two are absolutely glowing," said Eleanor Ashford, a family friend who had known Brandon since he was in diapers. "Young love is such a beautiful thing." "We feel very lucky," Mackenzie replied, looking up at Brandon with an expression of such complete adoration that his heart skipped a beat. "How did you know he was the one?" Eleanor asked. It was the question Brandon had been dreading all evening, the one that required Mackenzie to create believable emotion from nothing. "Honestly?" Mackenzie paused as if considering how much to reveal. "It was the way he listened to me. Not just to my words, but to what I was not saying. He saw things in me that I had stopped seeing in myself. That is how you know it is real," Eleanor said with satisfaction. "When someone sees your potential and helps you become the person you are meant to be." Brandon felt something tighten in his chest. Mackenzie was describing something that sounded very much like what was actually happening between them, despite the artificial circumstances that had brought them together. "Excuse me," a voice interrupted. "Brandon Hart?" Brandon turned to see a woman approaching, her press credentials visible on a lanyard around her neck. His stomach dropped. "I am Jennifer Walsh, from the Hampton Social Register. I was hoping to get a few quotes about your engagement for our next issue." Brandon felt Mackenzie tense beside him, though her smile never wavered. They had not discussed how to handle press attention, had not prepared for the possibility that their performance would be documented for public consumption. "Of course," Brandon said, slipping his arm around Mackenzie's waist. "Though I hope you will understand if we want to keep some details private. Naturally, but our readers are so curious about the woman who finally captured Brandon Hart's heart. Mackenzie," What can you tell us about yourself? Mackenzie leaned into Brandon's embrace, every inch the radiant bride-to-be. There is not much to tell, really. I am just a girl from Queens who got very lucky. How did you two meet? It was raining, Mackenzie said, launching into the story they had practiced. But as she spoke, Brandon noticed subtle changes in her delivery. The story was the same, but the emotions behind it felt deeper, more authentic than they had during rehearsal. And when did you know you wanted to marry her? Jennifer asked Brandon. The question caught him off guard. They had not practiced his side of the proposal story, had not discussed what his emotional journey was supposed to have been. It was not one moment, he said slowly, echoing Mackenzie's words from the night before. It was the accumulation of 100 small moments. The way she laughed at my terrible jokes, the way she challenged me to be better than I thought I could be. The way she looked at me like I was exactly who she had been waiting for her whole life. As he spoke, Brandon realized he was no longer talking about their fictional romance. He was describing what had actually happened to him over the past 4 days. The way Mackenzie had somehow slipped past all his defenses and made him believe in possibilities he had given up on years ago. That is so romantic, Jennifer gushed. When is the wedding? We have not set a date yet, Mackenzie said quickly. We are still enjoying being engaged. Well, you make a beautiful couple. Congratulations. After the reporter moved on, Brandon and Mackenzie found themselves momentarily alone near the edge of the tent. That was close, Mackenzie said quietly. You handled it perfectly. So did you. She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. That thing you said about 100 small moments, that was not in our script. No, it was not. Where did it come from? Brandon met her gaze, seeing his own confusion reflected in her green eyes. I think it came from the truth. Before Mackenzie could respond, the sound of a spoon tapping against a glass echoed through the tent. Richard Hart stood at the front of the room, commanding attention with the natural authority that had made him successful in business. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for a moment. The crowd quieted, turning toward Brandon's father. This was the moment Brandon had been dreading, when their private performance would become public spectacle. 30 years ago, Miranda and I stood in this same garden and promised to love and honor each other for the rest of our lives. Tonight, we celebrate not just our marriage, but the family we have built and the legacy we hope to leave behind. Richard's eyes found Brandon in the crowd, and something in his expression was softer than usual. Our son Brandon has given us many reasons to be proud over the years. His leadership of the company, his commitment to our family values, his dedication to the people who depend on us for their livelihoods. But tonight, we have a new reason to celebrate. Brandon felt Mackenzie's hand slip into his, her fingers intertwining with his own. The gesture was probably for show, but the comfort it provided was entirely real. Brandon has found someone who brings out the best in him, someone who makes him laugh, challenges him to grow, and loves him for exactly who he is. Mackenzie, we're delighted to welcome you into our family. The crowd burst into applause, and Brandon found himself being pushed forward with Mackenzie toward the front of the tent. This was not what they had planned, not how he had imagined their engagement would be announced. Speech! Someone called from the back of the crowd. Let us hear from the happy couple. Brandon looked out at the sea of expectant faces, family friends, business associates, people who had known him his entire life. They were waiting for him to say something romantic and heartfelt about the woman beside him, something that would confirm what they had just been told about his happiness. He turned to Mackenzie, seeing his own panic reflected in her eyes. But then she smiled, the expression transforming her face with such genuine warmth that he forgot about everyone else in the room. Go ahead, she whispered. Tell them how you feel. The words came without conscious thought, pulled from some deep place he had not known existed. "Most of you have known me since I was a child," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the tent. "You have watched me grow up, make mistakes, learn from them, and try to become the man my parents raised me to be. But until I met Mackenzie, I never really understood what it meant to be truly happy." He looked down at her, no longer seeing the actress he had hired to solve his problems. Instead, he saw the woman who had listened to his dreams without judgment, who had seen through his defenses to the person he was afraid to be, who had somehow made him believe in love again in the span of 4 days. "She sees me not as the CEO of Hart Industries, not as Richard and Miranda's son, not as someone who comes with expectations and obligations. She sees me as Brandon, just Brandon. And that is a gift I never knew I needed." The tent was completely silent, 300 people hanging on his every word. But Brandon was only aware of Mackenzie, of the way she was looking at him with tears in her eyes. "Mackenzie Barnes, you have changed my life in ways I am still discovering. You have made me braver, kinder, more honest with myself and everyone around me. I cannot promise that loving me will always be easy, but I can promise that I will spend every day trying to be worthy of the chance you have given me." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the engagement ring, the diamond catching the light from the chandeliers overhead. As he dropped to one knee in front of 300 witnesses, Brandon realized that nothing about this moment felt like a performance anymore. "Will you marry me?" The question hung in the air for what felt like an eternity. Brandon looked up at Mackenzie, seeing surprise and something deeper flickering across her face. For a terrifying moment, he wondered if she would break character, if the weight of the moment would be too much for her to handle. Then she smiled, tears spilling down her cheeks, and nodded. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the thunderous applause that erupted from the crowd. "Yes, I will marry you." Brandon slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that were not entirely steady. When he stood, Mackenzie threw her arms around his neck, and he lifted her off the ground, spinning her in a circle as the crowd cheered around them. But when their eyes met, when she looked at him with an expression of such complete trust and affection, Brandon forgot about the crowd entirely. He leaned down and kissed her, soft and gentle at first, then deeper as she responded with surprising passion. The kiss lasted only seconds, but it changed everything. When they broke apart, Brandon saw his own confusion reflected in Mackenzie's eyes. What had just happened between them had nothing to do with their contract, nothing to do with the role they were playing for the assembled guests. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard Hart's voice cut through the noise, "I give you my son Brandon and his fiancée, Mackenzie Barnes." The celebration continued around them. Congratulations, champagne toasts, requests for details about wedding plans. But Brandon felt strangely detached from it all, as if he were watching the scene from a great distance. All his attention was focused on the woman beside him, on the way she was handling the attention with grace and charm, while stealing glances at him that seemed filled with questions neither of them was ready to ask. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Brandon found himself standing with Mackenzie near the edge of the garden, both of them exhausted from hours of performance. "We did it," she said quietly. "We did. Everyone believed us. Everyone believed us." Mackenzie turned to face him, her expression serious in the moonlight. "Brandon, about what happened up there?" "I know. It got a little intense." "A little intense." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You proposed to me in front of 300 people. With actual tears in your eyes. You cried too. I was acting. Were you?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither of them was prepared to address. Mackenzie looked down at the engagement ring on her finger, twisting it nervously. "I should give this back to you," she said. "Keep it, For tonight, at least, people will expect to see it. Brandon, we need to talk about what happens next. This has gotten more complicated than either of us anticipated. Before he could respond, Miranda Hart approached, her face glowing with happiness. Oh, darlings, what a perfect evening. I have not seen your father this happy in years. He is already talking about wedding plans. Brandon felt his stomach drop. Wedding plans? Well, of course. You cannot get engaged at our anniversary celebration and then wait years to actually get married. We were thinking next spring. April, perhaps, when the gardens are in bloom. Mackenzie's hand found Brandon's arm, her grip tight enough to leave marks. That sounds lovely, she managed to say, but we have not really discussed timing yet. Nonsense, dear. There is no point in long engagements when you are as sure of each other as you two clearly are. Besides, I'm not getting any younger, and I want to see my son settled and happy. Miranda kissed them both goodnight and drifted away, leaving Brandon and Mackenzie staring at each other in the darkness. April, Mackenzie said faintly. 6 months from now. Brandon, what have we done? He looked at this woman who had entered his life 4 days ago as a business arrangement and who now wore his ring and had the expectations of his entire family resting on her shoulders. She was right. They had created something much more complicated than either of them had bargained for. I think, he said slowly, we might have accidentally changed both of our lives. Is that a good thing or a terrible thing? Brandon reached for her hand, the one wearing his ring, and lifted it to his lips. The gesture was tender, intimate, nothing like the public displays they had been putting on all evening. I guess we are about to find out. As they walked back toward the house, Brandon realized that their 48-hour arrangement had just become something indefinite and potentially life-altering. They were no longer just pretending to be engaged. They were engaged, at least in the eyes of everyone who mattered to him. The question now was whether they could figure out how to turn their beautiful lie into something real, or whether they would both be destroyed by the attempt. But as Mackenzie's hand nestled trustingly in his, as he caught the scent of her perfume and felt the warmth of her presence beside him, Brandon found himself hoping they would at least have the chance to try. The weekend that was supposed to solve his problems had just created an entirely new set of challenges. But for the first time in his adult life, Brandon Hart was looking forward to facing those challenges with someone who understood exactly what it felt like to risk everything on the possibility of love. Even if that love had started as the most elaborate performance of their lives, the morning after the anniversary celebration arrived with the brutal clarity that follows a night of too much champagne and too many life-altering decisions. Brandon woke in his childhood bedroom with sunlight streaming through windows he had forgotten to close, his head pounding and his mouth dry as cotton. For a blissful moment, he lay still and tried to remember why his chest felt tight with anxiety. Then the memories flooded back. The public proposal, the ring on Mackenzie's finger, his mother's excited talk of wedding plans, and most disturbing of all, the way he had felt when he kissed Mackenzie in front of 300 witnesses. It had not felt like acting. Brandon reached for his phone on the nightstand, squinting at the screen. 12 missed calls from his assistant, 8 text messages from business associates offering congratulations, and 1 missed call from Mackenzie at 6:47 that morning. He dialed her number, his heart racing as it rang. "Brandon!" Her voice was thick with sleep, husky in a way that sent an unexpected jolt of awareness through him. "Did I wake you?" "No, I have been up for hours. I could not sleep." There was a pause. "We need to talk." "I know." "Are you free this morning?" "I am free until reality sets in, which I estimate will be around noon when the first newspaper hits the stands." Brandon had not thought about media coverage. The Hampton Social Register was a small publication, but other outlets might have picked up the story of his engagement. By this afternoon, their arrangement might be public knowledge far beyond the circle of family and friends who had witnessed it. "Can you meet me at my apartment in an hour?" "Your apartment? Is that wise? If we are going to figure out how to end this thing, we probably should not be seen together more than necessary." End this thing. The words hit Brandon like cold water, clarifying thoughts that had been muddled with exhaustion and emotion. Is that what we are going to do? End it. Mackenzie was quiet for so long that Brandon wondered if the call had dropped. "I do not know," she said finally. "Do you?" "I do not know either. That is why we need to talk. Give me your address. I will be there in an hour." Brandon's penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a building on Central Park West, with views that stretched from the Hudson River to the east side. He had purchased it 5 years earlier, drawn by the privacy and the sense of being above the chaos of the city below. This morning, as he stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows waiting for Mackenzie to arrive, the apartment felt less like a sanctuary and more like a prison of his own making. When the doorman announced her arrival, Brandon's pulse quickened in a way that had nothing to do with anxiety and everything to do with anticipation. He had not seen her for less than 12 hours, but he found himself eager for her company in a way that complicated everything they needed to discuss. Mackenzie emerged from the elevator looking nothing like the elegant woman who had charmed 300 guests the night before. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, her face free of makeup. She looked younger, more vulnerable, and somehow more beautiful than she had in the designer gown. "Nice place," she said, glancing around the spacious living room with its modern furniture and carefully curated art collection. "Thank you. Can I get you some coffee?" "Please, I have a feeling I'm going to need the caffeine for this conversation." Brandon led her to the kitchen, grateful for the mundane task of making coffee. The normalcy of measuring grounds and adding water gave him time to organize his thoughts, though he was not sure any amount of organization would help him navigate the conversation ahead. "So," Mackenzie said, accepting the mug he offered her. That happened, he agreed. "Your mother wants us married by April." "My mother has always been an optimist." Mackenzie laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Brandon, what are we going to do? Because as of last night, we are not just pretending to be engaged anymore. We are actually engaged, at least as far as the rest of the world is concerned." Brandon leaned against the kitchen counter, studying her face. In the bright morning light, he could see the exhaustion around her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. She was as overwhelmed by their situation as he was. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I asked you first, and I am asking you now. What do you want, Mackenzie? Not what you think you should want, not what makes the most sense financially or practically. What do you actually want?" She set down her coffee mug and turned to face the window, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were cold. "I want to understand what happened last night. When you proposed, when you kissed me, when you looked at me like I was the only person in the room, was that all just part of the performance?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications that would determine the direction of both their lives. "Was it performance for you?" Brandon asked instead of answering. "I am not sure I know the difference anymore." Mackenzie turned back to him, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. 4 days ago, I was a struggling actress serving coffee to strangers and wondering how I was going to make rent. Now, I am wearing a $20,000 ring and your mother is planning my wedding. Everything has happened so fast that I cannot tell what is real and what is just really good acting." Brandon crossed the kitchen, stopping just close enough to touch her if he chose to. "The way you made me feel last night was real," he said quietly. "The way you make me feel right now is real. I cannot speak for you, but I stopped acting somewhere between meeting my parents and standing up in front of 300 people and telling them I wanted to spend my life with you." Mackenzie's breath caught. "Brandon, I know this is crazy. I know we barely know each other. I know the circumstances that brought us together were artificial and probably ethically questionable. But I also know that I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. How do you feel about me?" The question was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of everything they had not yet said to each other. "I feel like I have been sleepwalking through my life for 38 years, and you woke me up. I feel like every decision I made before I met you was based on fear, and every decision I want to make now is based on hope. I feel like you see me more clearly than anyone ever has, and somehow you still think I am worth loving." Tears spilled down Mackenzie's cheeks, but she did not look away from him. "And I feel terrified," Brandon continued, "because I think I am falling in love with you, and I have no idea if what you feel for me is real or if you are just the best actress I have ever met." Mackenzie reached up and touched his face, her palm warm against his cheek. "I am a good actress," she said softly, "but I am not that good. No one is that good." "What does that mean?" "It means that what you saw last night, what you are seeing right now, is not a performance. It means that somewhere between your parents' dinner table and that tent full of people, I stopped pretending to be in love with you and started actually being in love with you." The admission hung in the air between them, honest and terrifying and full of possibility. "So what do we do now?" Brandon asked. "I do not know. This is not exactly a situation they cover in relationship advice columns. How do you build something real on a foundation of lies? Maybe we do not have to build on that foundation. Maybe we can start over." "Start over how?" Brandon took her hands in his, the engagement ring solid and real between their palms. "Maybe we stop thinking about this as an arrangement that got complicated and start thinking about it as a relationship that began in an unusual way. Maybe we give ourselves permission to see where this goes without worrying about how it started." "That sounds suspiciously like you are asking me to actually date you." "I am asking you to actually date me. For real this time. No contracts, no predetermined timeline, no financial arrangements. Just two people who are attracted to each other, trying to figure out if they could build something lasting together." Mackenzie was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. "What about your family? What about the expectations? What about the fact that your mother is already planning our wedding?" "We tell them the truth. That we rushed into an engagement, that we want to take things slower, that we need time to really get to know each other before we make such a big commitment." "And the media attention? The story in the social register? We deal with it, together, as partners." "Partners," Mackenzie repeated, and something in her expression softened. "I like the sound of that. Is that a yes?" "That is a, let me think about it. This is the biggest decision of my life, Brandon. I need a little time to process." Brandon nodded, though every instinct told him to push for an answer, to lock in her commitment before she could change her mind. "How much time do you need?" "Give me until tonight. I want to go home, think about everything that has happened, maybe talk to someone who can help me see this situation clearly." "Someone like who?" "My brother. He is the only family I have, and he knows me better than anyone. If I am making a huge mistake, he will tell me." The thought of Mackenzie discussing their situation with someone else made Brandon nervous, but he understood her need for perspective from someone who cared about her welfare. "All right, tonight. Should I pick you up for dinner?" "Let me call you. If I decide this is something I want to pursue, we can talk about next steps. If I decide it is too complicated, too risky, too crazy to work, then we figure out how to end this gracefully." Brandon walked her to the elevator, fighting the urge to kiss her goodbye. Everything between them felt fragile, balanced on the edge of possibility and disaster. "Mackenzie," he said as the elevator doors opened. "Yeah? For what it is worth, I think you are brave as hell for even considering this. Most people would run in the opposite direction. Most people have not spent their entire adult lives waiting for someone to take a chance on them," she said quietly. "Maybe I am just tired of playing it safe." After she left, Brandon stood in his empty apartment trying to process everything that had changed in the span of a single conversation. 12 hours ago, he had been a man pretending to be engaged. Now he was a man genuinely in love, waiting to find out if the woman who had turned his life upside down was willing to take the same risk he was. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. His mother's name appeared on the screen. "Good morning, Mom." "Good morning, darling. I hope I'm not calling too early, but I could not sleep last night. I kept thinking about the wedding plans." Brandon closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his mother's excitement pressing down on him. "Mom, about that, I know you and Mackenzie probably want to be involved in the planning, but I could not help myself. I already called the florist, and she can do the most gorgeous arrangements with white roses and peonies. And I spoke to Chef Morrison about catering. He did the Pemberton wedding last spring, absolutely divine." "Mom, slow down. I am just so excited, Brandon. I have been waiting for this day for so long. To see you truly happy, to welcome a daughter into our family, it is everything I hoped for." The genuine joy in his mother's voice made Brandon's chest tight with guilt. Miranda Hart was making plans for a wedding that might never happen, investing her emotions in a relationship that had begun as a business transaction. "We need to talk," he said gently. "All of us. Can you and Dad come over tonight?" "Of course." "Is everything all right? You sound worried." "Everything is fine. Mackenzie and I just need to discuss some things with you both. About the wedding. About everything." After he hung up, Brandon realized he had committed to a conversation he was not sure he was prepared to have. If Mackenzie decided their situation was too complicated to pursue, he would have to tell his parents that their engagement was off barely 24 hours after announcing it. If she decided to give their relationship a real chance, he would have to explain why they needed to slow down the wedding plans without revealing the true nature of their arrangement. Either way, it was going to be a difficult evening. Brandon spent the day in his home office, trying to focus on work, but finding his attention constantly drifting to his phone. Every time it buzzed with a text or email, his heart raced with the hope that it was Mackenzie calling with her decision. By late afternoon, he had managed to accomplish very little beyond staring at quarterly reports and imagining various scenarios for how their conversation might go. At 5 o'clock, he gave up any pretense of productivity and started pacing his apartment like a caged animal. At 6:15, his phone finally rang. "Hi." Mackenzie's voice was soft, uncertain. "Hi, how are you feeling?" "Confused, scared, hopeful. Take your pick." "Did you talk to your brother?" "I did. He thinks I am completely insane." Brandon's heart sank. "And do you agree with him?" "I think he might be right about the insanity part, but I also think that might not be a bad thing." "What does that mean?" "It means I have been playing it safe my entire life, and it has gotten me nowhere. Maybe it is time to try something crazy. Mackenzie, it means yes, Brandon, yes, I want to try this. Yes, I want to see if what we felt last night was real. Yes, I am willing to risk everything on the possibility that two people can fall in love in 4 days and build something lasting together." Relief flooded through Brandon so completely that he had to sit down. "Really? Really? But I have conditions." "Name them." "We take this slow. We get to know each other without the pressure of wedding plans and family expectations. We figure out who we are together when we are not performing for an audience. Agreed. And we tell your parents the truth. Not about the original arrangement, but about the fact that we rushed into an engagement and want to take more time before we actually get married. I already called them. They are coming over tonight. Good. Because I refuse to build a real relationship on a foundation of lies to your family. Anything else? Just one more thing. I keep the job at the diner for now. I need to maintain some independence, some connection to my real life while we figure this out. The request surprised Brandon. He had assumed she would want to leave the demanding, low-paying job now that she had other options. If that is what you want, it is what I need. This has all happened so fast, Brandon. I need something in my life that is normal, familiar, mine. I understand. Do you? Because I get the feeling you are used to solving problems by throwing money at them. This is not a problem money can solve. The observation stung because it was accurate. Brandon's first instinct was always to use his resources to make difficulties disappear. But Mackenzie was right that their situation required a different approach. You are right, he admitted. This is new territory for me, but I am willing to learn. Good, because if we are going to do this, we are going to do it right. So what happens now? Now you come pick me up at 7 and we go face your parents together as partners. Partners, Brandon repeated, and for the first time in hours, he smiled. Brandon arrived at Mackenzie's apartment building at exactly 7 o'clock, his palms sweating despite the cool October evening. This conversation with his parents would set the tone for everything that followed, and he was not entirely sure how to explain their situation without revealing too much about how it had begun. Mackenzie was waiting in the lobby, wearing a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes. She looked nervous but determined, ready to face whatever the evening would bring. "Ready for this?" he asked as they walked to his car, as ready as anyone can be to tell their future in-laws that they want to postpone a wedding that was never actually planned. "We are not postponing it. We are taking time to plan it properly. Is there a difference?" "There is to my mother." The drive to his parents' house was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts about the conversation ahead. Brandon found himself stealing glances at Mackenzie, still amazed that she had agreed to pursue a real relationship with him, despite all the complications and uncertainties surrounding their situation. "What did your brother say?" he asked, as they stopped at a red light. "He said I was either about to make the best decision of my life or the worst one, and that either way, at least I would finally know what it felt like to take a real risk." "Sounds like good advice." "He also said that if you hurt me, he will hunt you down and make your life miserable." "How big is your brother?" 6'4" and a former college linebacker." "Good to know." They pulled up in front of the Hart family townhouse just as the sun was setting behind the trees of Central Park. The familiar building looked the same as always, but Brandon felt like everything about his relationship to it had changed in the past 24 hours. Miranda opened the door before they could knock, her face bright with excitement. "Mackenzie, darling, how are you feeling after last night? I imagine you must be exhausted." "A little overwhelmed," Mackenzie admitted, "but happy." Come in, come in. Your father is in the living room." "Brandon, he has been poring over wedding magazines all afternoon." Brandon and Mackenzie exchanged glances. This was going to be more difficult than either of them had anticipated. They found Richard Hart surrounded by bridal publications, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose as he studied an article about destination wedding venues. "Brandon, Mackenzie." He stood to greet them, and Brandon was surprised to see genuine warmth in his father's expression. "I have to admit, I owe you both an apology. I was skeptical about your relationship, but seeing you together last night, seeing how happy you make each other. I was wrong to doubt you." The admission hit Brandon like a physical blow. His father, who never apologized for anything, was admitting he had misjudged their relationship. The guilt was overwhelming. "Dad, no, let me finish. I have spent so many years focused on protecting this family's reputation that I forgot what was really important: your happiness. The fact that you have found someone who loves you for who you are, not what you represent, that is worth more than any business alliance or social connection." Brandon felt Mackenzie's hand slip into his, her fingers squeezing gently. "We appreciate that," she said softly. "And we need to talk to you both about something." Miranda settled into her chair, her expression expectant. "Of course, dear. What is it?" Brandon looked at Mackenzie, drawing strength from her steady presence beside him. "We think we moved too fast last night," he began. "The proposal, the announcement, it was all very romantic. But we realized we want to take more time before we actually get married." The silence that followed was deafening. Miranda's face fell, and Richard frowned over his reading glasses. "More time?" Miranda asked finally. "But you are already engaged." "How much more time do you need?" "We want to really get to know each other," Mackenzie explained, "to build a foundation for our marriage that goes beyond the initial excitement of falling in love." "But you said you have never been more sure of anything," Richard pointed out. "Last night, in front of 300 people, you said Mackenzie was exactly what you needed." "She is," Brandon said quickly. "But we want to make sure we are making this decision for the right reasons, not just because we got caught up in the romance of the moment." Miranda stood and walked to the window, her shoulders tense with disappointment. "How long are we talking about?" she asked without turning around. Brandon and Mackenzie looked at each other, neither of them having discussed a specific timeline. "Maybe a year," Mackenzie said. "Long enough to really know each other, to be sure we are compatible in all the ways that matter for a lifetime partnership." "A year?" Miranda spun around, her face stricken. "But I have already started making calls, putting deposits down. Mom, we will reimburse you for anything you cannot cancel." "It is not about the money, Brandon. It is about the fact that you stood up in front of our closest friends and family and declared your intention to marry this woman. Now, less than 24 hours later, you are backing away from that commitment." "We are not backing away," Mackenzie said firmly. "We are being responsible. We are making sure that when we do get married, it will be for all the right reasons." Richard closed the magazine he had been reading and removed his glasses. "Is there something you are not telling us? Are you having second thoughts about the engagement?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implications. Brandon realized his parents were interpreting their request for more time as a sign that their relationship was in trouble, when the truth was exactly the opposite. "We are not having second thoughts about each other," he said carefully. "We are having second thoughts about rushing into marriage before we have had a chance to build a proper foundation." "What kind of foundation do you need beyond love?" Miranda asked. It was Mackenzie who answered, her voice gentle but certain. "We need to know how we handle conflict. We need to understand each other's long-term goals, our attitudes about money and family and career. We need to see how we fit into each other's daily lives, not just the romantic moments." "Those are all very practical concerns," Richard said slowly. "Perhaps more practical than I would have expected from two people who claim to be madly in love." Brandon felt a chill of warning. His father was too perceptive, too experienced at reading people's motivations. If they were not careful, he would start asking questions they were not prepared to answer. "Is it wrong to want to be practical about the most important decision of our lives?" Mackenzie asked. "No," Richard admitted. "It is actually quite wise." I just find it interesting that you did not have these concerns before you accepted Brandon's proposal. The trap was closing around them, and Brandon could see no way out except more honesty than he was comfortable with. The truth is, he said slowly, everything happened so fast that we did not have time to think about the practical implications. We were caught up in the moment, in the romance of it all. Now that we have had time to think clearly, we want to make sure we are making the right decision for the right reasons. And what if you discover you are not compatible in all these practical ways? Miranda asked. What happens to the engagement then? Brandon felt Mackenzie tense beside him, and he realized they had not discussed this possibility. Then we will deal with that when it happens, he said. But we would rather find out now than after we are married. Richard studied them both for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Very well, he said finally. I think you are both being unnecessarily cautious. But I suppose there is wisdom in taking time to be certain. However, I have one condition. What is that? Brandon asked. You do not make any public announcements about delaying the wedding. As far as the outside world is concerned, you are happily engaged and planning a wedding for next year. The last thing this family needs is speculation about the stability of your relationship. Agreed, Mackenzie said quickly. Miranda returned to her chair, though she still looked disappointed. I suppose I should cancel the florist, she said sadly. You do not have to cancel everything, Brandon said, hating the dejection in his mother's voice. Just postpone the timeline. When we are ready to move forward, all that planning will be useful. When do you think that might be? Miranda asked hopefully. Brandon looked at Mackenzie, seeing his own uncertainty reflected in her eyes. We will know when we know, Mackenzie said gently. But I promise you, when we do decide to get married, you will be the first to know. The rest of the evening passed in stilted conversation, with Miranda making a visible effort to hide her disappointment and Richard asking pointed questions about their plans for getting to know each other better. By the time they left, Brandon felt emotionally exhausted and guilty about disappointing his mother. That went well, Mackenzie said dryly as they drove back toward her apartment. My mother was devastated. Your mother will recover, and she will be much happier when we actually do get married, assuming we decide to go through with it. The casual way she mentioned the possibility of not getting married sent a jolt of anxiety through Brandon. Are you already having doubts? I am having realistic thoughts about the challenges ahead of us. We just committed to spending a year getting to know each other, Brandon. A year is a long time. A lot can change. A lot can change for the better, too. True, I guess we will find out. They pulled up in front of her building, and Brandon turned off the engine. So what happens now? He asked. Now we start dating, for real this time. When can I see you again? I work tomorrow night, but I am free Tuesday. Want to have dinner? Somewhere quiet where we can actually talk. I know just the place. Mackenzie leaned over and kissed his cheek, the simple gesture sending warmth through his entire body. Thank you, she said softly. For what? For being willing to do this the right way. For not pressuring me to rush into something I was not ready for. Thank you for giving us a chance. As Brandon watched her walk into her building, he felt a mixture of relief and anticipation that was entirely new to him. For the first time in his adult life, he was embarking on a relationship without knowing how it would end, without a predetermined timeline or outcome. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Tuesday evening found Brandon standing outside a small Italian restaurant in the village, checking his watch nervously. He had chosen the place carefully, intimate enough for private conversation, but casual enough that Mackenzie would not feel underdressed in her work clothes. She arrived exactly on time, wearing jeans and a sweater that hugged her curves in a way that made Brandon forget about everything except how much he wanted to touch her. "Sorry," she said, slightly breathless from hurrying. "I came straight from the diner. I probably smell like coffee and bacon grease." "You smell perfect," he said honestly, catching a hint of her perfume mixed with the lingering scents of her workplace. The restaurant was exactly what he had hoped for, dimly lit, with small tables that encouraged intimate conversation. They were seated in a corner booth, away from the other diners, with nothing between them except the flickering candle on their table. "This is nice," Mackenzie said, looking around appreciatively. "Very different from the places we went during our performance weekend. I wanted somewhere we could be ourselves. No expectations, no audience, no pressure to impress anyone. And who are we when we are being ourselves?" The question was both playful and serious, and Brandon realized he was not entirely sure how to answer it. "I guess that is what we are here to find out." They ordered wine and appetizers, and Brandon found himself studying Mackenzie's face in the candlelight. Without the formal makeup and elegant styling, she looked younger, more accessible, more real. "Tell me about your day," he said. "You really want to hear about my day slinging coffee and dodging inappropriate comments from construction workers?" "I really do." So Mackenzie told him about the regular customers who had become like family to her, about the elderly man who came in every morning for black coffee and a blueberry muffin, about the young mother who brought her toddler in for hot chocolate on cold afternoons. She told him about the dreams she shared with other struggling actors who worked at the diner, about auditions and rejections and the small victories that kept them all going. "It sounds like you actually enjoy it," Brandon observed. "Parts of it. I like the people, the routine, the way everyone looks out for each other. It is not glamorous, but it is honest." "Is that important to you? Honesty?" Mackenzie paused with her wineglass halfway to her lips, considering the question. "It is everything to me. I grew up with a mother who told beautiful lies to make life seem more bearable than it was. She convinced me that my father was coming back someday, that we would move out of our tiny apartment into a real house, that things would get better if we just believed hard enough." Did they get better? Eventually, but not because of believing. They got better because my brother and I worked our asses off to make them better. Because we stopped waiting for someone else to rescue us and started rescuing ourselves. Brandon felt something shift in his understanding of her. Mackenzie's strength was not just natural confidence. It was hard-won through years of disappointment and self-reliance. "Is that why you took the job with me?" he asked. "To rescue yourself?" "Partly, but also because you were honest about what you needed from me. No false promises, no pretending it was anything other than a business arrangement. I respected that. And now I am hoping we can build something that is about more than what we need from each other. Something about what we want to give to each other." The distinction was subtle but important, and Brandon found himself moved by her insight. "What do you want to give me?" he asked. Mackenzie smiled, and the expression transformed her face with warmth and mischief. "I want to give you permission to be imperfect, to make mistakes, to not have all the answers, to be human instead of the perfect heart family heir. And what do you want from me? I want you to see me as I really am, not as some fantasy of the perfect woman. I want you to know about my student loans and my terrible cooking and the fact that I cry at commercials. I want you to love me anyway." "I already do," Brandon said quietly. The words were out before he could stop them, more honest than he had intended to be so early in their real relationship. But looking at Mackenzie across the small table, seeing the vulnerability in her eyes, he could not regret the admission. "You do not know me well enough to love me yet," she said softly. "Then let me get to know you. Tell me everything." So she did. Over the course of the next 3 hours, Mackenzie told him about growing up poor but not impoverished, about a mother who worked 2 jobs but still found time to read bedtime stories. She told him about her brother Tommy, who had given up his own dreams of playing professional football to help support their family. She told him about the teacher who had encouraged her to audition for the school play, about the moment she had stepped onto a stage and felt like she was finally home. "What about you?" she asked as they lingered over dessert. "Tell me about the Brandon heart that no one else gets to see." "There is not much to tell. My life has been pretty predictable." "That is not true, and you know it. Tell me about the boy who wanted to run away to live in the woods. Tell me about the dreams you gave up to become who your father needed you to be." So Brandon found himself talking about things he had never shared with anyone. About the loneliness of growing up wealthy, about the weight of expectations that had shaped every decision he had ever made. He told her about the year he had spent teaching English in rural Thailand after college, the happiest year of his life, before his father had convinced him to come home and join the family business. "Do you ever think about going back to teaching?" Mackenzie asked. "Every day, but it is not realistic. Too many people depend on the company, on the decisions I make. What if you could find a way to do both? What if you could use your position to create educational opportunities for people who could not otherwise access them?" The suggestion surprised him with its simplicity and its possibility. "I never thought about that." "Maybe that is your problem. You think in terms of either or, instead of both and." As the evening wound down and they prepared to leave, Brandon realized that something fundamental had changed between them. The nervous energy of their early interactions had settled into something deeper and more comfortable. They were no longer 2 strangers trying to convince the world they were in love. They were 2 people genuinely getting to know each other and liking what they discovered. "Can I drive you home?" he asked as they stepped out into the cool night air. "I can take the subway." "I know you can. I am asking if you want me to drive you." Mackenzie smiled, linking her arm through his. "Yes, I would like that." The drive to Queens was filled with easy conversation and comfortable silences. When they reached her building, Brandon walked her to the door, suddenly unsure of the protocol for ending their first real date. "Thank you for tonight," Mackenzie said, turning to face him on the front steps. "Thank you for giving us a chance." They stood looking at each other in the glow of the streetlight, the moment charged with possibility and restraint. "I should go in," Mackenzie said, but she made no move toward the door. "You should," Brandon agreed, but he stepped closer instead of backing away. When he kissed her, it was different from the public display at the anniversary celebration. This kiss was soft, tentative, real. It tasted of wine and possibility and the promise of all the conversations they had yet to have. "Good night, Brandon," Mackenzie whispered when they broke apart. "Good night." As he drove back to Manhattan, Brandon found himself smiling for no reason except that he was happy. For the first time in his adult life, he was in a relationship that felt like a choice rather than an obligation, with a woman who saw him as he really was and seemed to like what she saw. It was a good beginning. Over the next several weeks, Brandon and Mackenzie fell into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. They had dinner twice a week, took long walks through Central Park on weekend afternoons, and spent hours on the phone talking about everything and nothing. Brandon learned that Mackenzie was a voracious reader who favored 19th century novels, that she could speak conversational Spanish from her high school years working at a restaurant in Queens, and that she had a terrible habit of staying up too late watching old movies on television. Mackenzie learned that Brandon was an accomplished pianist who had not touched the keys in years, that he donated anonymously to several educational charities, and that he had once seriously considered giving up his inheritance to pursue a career in public service. "Why did you not do it?" she asked one evening, as they walked along the Hudson River, the lights of the city reflecting on the dark water. "Fear, mostly," Fear of disappointing my parents, fear of giving up financial security, fear of not being good enough at something that mattered to me. And now I think the bigger fear is spending my entire life wondering what might have been. They were careful to keep their relationship private, aware that too much public scrutiny could complicate their still fragile connection. But word inevitably leaked out that Brandon Hart was frequently seen with his fiancée, and the society pages began running photos of them at restaurants and cultural events. "We look happy," Mackenzie observed one morning, showing him a picture from the previous night's art gallery opening. "We are happy," Brandon replied, and realized it was true, but their newfound happiness was not without complications. The pressure from his family to set a wedding date continued, with Miranda dropping increasingly unsubtle hints about venues and dress shopping. The media attention made it difficult for Mackenzie to maintain her normal routine, with photographers occasionally waiting outside the diner where she worked. Most challenging of all was navigating the physical aspect of their relationship. They were taking things slowly, getting to know each other as real people rather than characters in a performance. But the attraction between them was undeniable, and the restraint required to build emotional intimacy before physical intimacy sometimes felt overwhelming. "I should probably go," Brandon said one evening as they stood in the doorway of Mackenzie's apartment after another long, perfect date. "You should," she agreed, but her hand was resting on his chest, and she was looking at him with an expression that made his pulse race. "I am trying to be a gentleman here." "I know, I appreciate that, but maybe being a gentleman is overrated." Before Brandon could respond, Mackenzie's phone rang from inside the apartment, breaking the spell between them. "I should get that," she said reluctantly. "Go ahead. I will talk to you tomorrow." As Brandon drove home that night, he found himself thinking about the careful balance they were trying to maintain. They were building something real and meaningful, but they were also still engaged in the eyes of the world, still playing roles that had originated as fiction. The contradiction was becoming harder to navigate, and Brandon sensed that something would have to give soon. Either they would have to commit fully to making their relationship real in every sense, or they would have to find a way to extricate themselves from the public engagement without destroying what they had built in private. The decision was taken out of their hands 3 weeks later. Brandon was in his office reviewing quarterly reports when his assistant knocked on the door. "There is a woman here to see you," Jessica said. "She does not have an appointment, but she says it is urgent and personal." "Did she give you a name?" "Jennifer Walsh. She says she is a reporter." Brandon felt his blood turn to ice. Jennifer Walsh was the reporter who had interviewed them at the anniversary celebration, the one who had seemed charmed by their love story. "Send her in." Jennifer Walsh entered his office with the confident stride of someone who held all the cards. She was carrying a manila folder and wearing an expression that made Brandon's stomach clench with dread. "Miss Walsh, what can I do for you?" "You can tell me the truth about your engagement to Mackenzie Barnes." Brandon forced himself to remain calm, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. "I am not sure what you mean." Jennifer opened her folder and spread several photographs across his desk. They showed Brandon entering Mackenzie's apartment building on a Thursday evening 3 weeks earlier, the night before the anniversary celebration. These pictures were taken by a freelance photographer who was covering a different story in the neighborhood. Imagine his surprise when he developed them and realized he had captured Brandon Hart visiting an apartment building in Queens the night before his engagement was announced. Brandon stared at the photos, his mind racing through possible explanations and their likely effectiveness. "I do not see how visiting my fiancée is newsworthy." It might not be. if you had not told everyone you met her 2 weeks before the engagement. But according to the building superintendent, you had never been there before that night. According to several neighbors, Mackenzie had never mentioned having a boyfriend, let alone a wealthy fiancé. The trap was closing around them, and Brandon could see no way out that would not destroy everything they had built. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "I want the real story. How long had you known Mackenzie before the engagement? Why did you lie about how you met? What is the true nature of your relationship?" Brandon stood and walked to the window, buying himself time to think. Below, the city continued its relentless pace, oblivious to the crisis unfolding in his office. "You have no proof of anything, except that I visited Mackenzie's apartment. People in relationships visit each other's homes. That is not evidence of deception." "Maybe not, but it is enough to start asking questions, and once I start digging, who knows what else I might find." The threat was clear. Jennifer Walsh suspected their relationship was not what it appeared to be, and she was prepared to investigate until she found evidence to support her suspicions. "What do you want from me?" Brandon asked again. "An exclusive interview, the real story of your relationship, whatever that story is. In exchange, I will hold off on publishing anything about the timeline discrepancies. And if I refuse, then I run what I have and let the public draw their own conclusions about why Brandon Hart felt the need to lie about his relationship." Brandon realized he was trapped. Refusing the interview would confirm Jennifer's suspicions and invite further investigation. Agreeing to it would require him to either tell the truth about their arrangement or construct an even more elaborate lie. "I need time to discuss this with Mackenzie." "You have 24 hours. Then I run with what I have." After Jennifer left, Brandon sat alone in his office, trying to figure out how to tell Mackenzie that their carefully constructed new life was about to come crashing down around them. Everything they had built over the past month, the trust, the genuine affection, the possibility of a real future together, was threatened by the very deception that had brought them together. He called her immediately. "Brandon, what is wrong? You sound terrible. We need to talk, in person. Can you meet me at my apartment in an hour? I am at work until 6. Then call in sick." This cannot wait. The urgency in his voice must have convinced her, because she agreed to meet him without asking more questions. When Mackenzie arrived at his apartment, one look at his face told her that their world was about to change. "What happened?" she asked immediately. Brandon told her about Jennifer Walsh's visit, about the photographs, about the ultimatum they had been given. With each word, he watched the color drain from Mackenzie's face. 24 hours, she said when he finished. 24 hours. And our options are what exactly? Tell her the truth and destroy both our reputations, or lie and risk her finding out anyway? There is a third option. What? Brandon took her hands in his, hating what he was about to suggest. We end the engagement, publicly. We say we realized we rushed into things, that we decided we were not compatible, that we are parting amicably. Mackenzie stared at him, her green eyes wide with shock. You want to break up. I want to protect you. If we end the engagement, there is no story. Jennifer Walsh has nothing to write about except a relationship that did not work out. And what happens to us? To what we have been building together? I do not know. Maybe we could try again later, when the attention dies down. Maybe we could find a way to be together without the public pressure. Mackenzie pulled her hands free and walked to the window, her arms wrapped around herself. Or maybe this is just the universe telling us that relationships built on lies never work out, no matter how much we want them to. This is not built on lies anymore. What we have now is real. Is it? Because right now, faced with the first real challenge, your instinct is to run away, to throw away everything we have built rather than fight for it. The accusation stung because it contained more truth than Brandon wanted to acknowledge. I am trying to protect you. I do not need you to protect me. I need you to trust me enough to figure this out together. Mackenzie turned from the window, her expression fierce and determined. You know what I think we should do? I think we should tell Jennifer Walsh the truth, all of it, the truth, that we met under unusual circumstances, that our engagement happened faster than we originally planned, but that we have spent the last month getting to know each other and falling in love for real. That sometimes the best relationships start in unexpected ways. And if she does not believe us, if she digs deeper and finds evidence of our original arrangement, then we deal with that when it happens. But I refuse to give up on us without a fight. Brandon stared at this woman, who continued to surprise him with her courage and determination. She was right. His first instinct had been to run, to protect himself and her by ending their relationship before it could be destroyed by outside forces. But maybe running was not the answer. Maybe the relationship they had built was strong enough to survive the truth. You really think we should tell her everything? I think we should tell her everything that matters. That we are two people who found each other in an unconventional way and decided to see if we could build something real together. That we are still figuring it out, but that we care enough about each other to try. And the wedding timeline? The pressure from my family? We tell them the same thing. That we are taking our time, building a foundation, making sure we are making the right decision for the right reasons. Brandon pulled Mackenzie into his arms, holding her close and breathing in the scent of her perfume. I love you, he said quietly. I should have said that first, before I started talking about ending things. I love you, and I want to fight for us. I love you too. And I think we are worth fighting for. They spent the rest of the evening crafting their strategy for the interview with Jennifer Walsh. They would be honest about the timeline confusion, admitting that their relationship had moved faster than they had originally intended. They would be open about their decision to take more time before actually getting married. And they would be completely truthful about their feelings for each other. It was a risky strategy, but it felt right in a way that running away did not. The next morning, Brandon called Jennifer Walsh and agreed to the interview, with the condition that Mackenzie be included and that they be allowed to tell their story in their own words. 1 hour, Jennifer said, and I want complete honesty. You will get it. The interview took place that afternoon in the living room of Brandon's apartment. Jennifer Walsh arrived with a digital recorder and a notebook, her expressions skeptical but interested. So, she began after they were settled. Let's start with the timeline. When did you actually meet? Brandon and Mackenzie looked at each other, and he saw his own resolve reflected in her eyes. 3 days before the anniversary celebration, Mackenzie said calmly. Jennifer's eyebrows shot up. 3 days. 3 days, Brandon confirmed. We met through a mutual acquaintance who thought we might be compatible. It was not exactly a lie. His assistant had thought they would work well together for their arrangement. And you decided to get engaged after knowing each other for 3 days. We decided to see if we were compatible, Mackenzie said carefully. The engagement happened more quickly than either of us expected. How quickly? At the anniversary celebration, Brandon admitted. It was spontaneous, romantic, probably not the most practical decision either of us has ever made. So you proposed to a woman you had known for less than a week. I proposed to a woman I was falling in love with, Brandon said. Sometimes the heart does not follow practical timelines. Jennifer scribbled notes furiously, clearly intrigued by their admission. And now, are you having second thoughts? "We are having realistic thoughts," Mackenzie said. "We realized that getting married after knowing each other for such a short time was probably not wise, so we have decided to take more time to really get to know each other." "How much more time?" "As much as we need," Brandon said. "We would rather take a year to be sure than spend a lifetime regretting a hasty decision." "That is very mature of you," Jennifer said, though her tone suggested she was still suspicious. "But why lie about the timeline initially? Why not just admit you had a whirlwind romance?" This was the most dangerous question, the one that could expose the true nature of their original arrangement. "Because we were embarrassed," Mackenzie said, her voice soft but steady. "Because it sounds crazy to fall in love with someone in 3 days. Because we thought people would judge us for moving so fast. And now we realize that honesty is always better than trying to manage other people's perceptions," Brandon said. "We fell in love quickly, we got engaged impulsively, and we are now being more thoughtful about our future together. There is nothing shameful about any of that." Jennifer asked a few more questions about their relationship, their family's reactions, and their plans for the future. Brandon and Mackenzie answered as honestly as they could, without revealing the financial arrangement that had originally brought them together. "One last question," Jennifer said as she prepared to leave. "Do you think your relationship can survive this kind of scrutiny? The media attention, the public interest in your story?" Brandon looked at Mackenzie, seeing the woman who had agreed to risk everything on the possibility of love, who had chosen to fight for their relationship rather than run from it. "I think our relationship can survive anything as long as we face it together," he said. After Jennifer left, Brandon and Mackenzie sat in silence for several minutes, both of them emotionally drained by the experience. "Do you think she believed us?" Mackenzie asked finally. "I think she believed that we care about each other. Whether she believed the rest of it remains to be seen. What happens now? Now we wait to see what she writes. And we prepare to deal with whatever consequences follow." Mackenzie curled up next to him on the sofa, her head resting on his shoulder. "No regrets?" he asked. "No regrets. We told our truth, Brandon. Maybe not the whole truth, but the part that matters most." "Which part is that?" "That we love each other. That we are building something real together. That we are worth the risk." The article appeared in the Hampton Social Register 3 days later, under the headline, "A Modern Love Story, The Heart Engagement." Jennifer Walsh had written a surprisingly sympathetic piece about their whirlwind romance, focusing on their decision to take more time before marriage, rather than on the timeline discrepancies that had initially aroused her suspicion. "Young love in the digital age often moves at lightning speed," the article concluded. "But Brandon Hart and Mackenzie Barnes are proving that sometimes the most passionate romances benefit from a more measured approach to commitment. Their decision to extend their engagement while they build a stronger foundation is both mature and romantic, a refreshing change from the celebrity culture of quick marriages and quicker divorces." The response to the article was overwhelmingly positive. Friends and family members praised their maturity and thoughtfulness. The media attention, rather than becoming a scandal, became a celebration of their unconventional but ultimately sensible approach to love. "We did it," Mackenzie said, reading the article for the 3rd time over breakfast. "We actually pulled it off. We told the truth and people believed us because it was the truth," Brandon said, "at least the part about loving each other." "Is that enough? To build a real relationship on?" Brandon reached across the table and took her hand, the engagement ring solid and real between their palms. "I think love is always enough to start with. Everything else we can figure out as we go. Even the part about actually getting married someday, especially that part." 6 months later, Brandon and Mackenzie were no longer just pretending to be in love or learning to be in love. They were simply in love, with all the complications and joys that came with building a life together. They had weathered the media scrutiny, the family pressure, and the various challenges that came with merging two very different worlds. More importantly, they had learned to trust each other completely, to communicate honestly about their fears and dreams, and to support each other through the inevitable difficulties of any serious relationship. The question of marriage came up frequently, sometimes from Brandon's still hopeful mother, sometimes from friends who had been at the anniversary celebration, but mostly from their own growing certainty that they wanted to spend their lives together. "What do you think?" Brandon asked one evening as they walked through Central Park, the spring air warm and full of possibility. "Are you ready to start planning a real wedding? Are you proposing to me again? I am asking if you want to make our fake engagement into a real marriage." Mackenzie stopped walking and turned to face him, her expression serious but warm. "I want to marry you, Brandon Hart. Not because your mother is planning the perfect April wedding, not because the newspapers are watching our every move, not because we got caught up in a performance that became real. I want to marry you because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Is that a yes?" "That is a yes." Brandon kissed her there in the middle of Central Park, surrounded by strangers and spring flowers, and the promise of all the ordinary, extraordinary days they would share together. Their wedding, when it finally took place 8 months later, was everything Miranda Hart had dreamed of and more. The ceremony was held in the garden where they had first met as strangers, hired to play a role, where they had learned to trust each other, where they had chosen love over fear and truth over convenience. But the most beautiful moment was not the exchange of vows or the kiss that sealed their marriage. It was the look they shared during the ceremony, a look that said they had made it through the impossible and come out on the other side as partners, lovers, and best friends. As they danced at their reception, surrounded by family and friends who had believed in their love story from the beginning, Mackenzie whispered in Brandon's ear, "No regrets, no regrets," he whispered back. "Just gratitude." For what? For the most beautiful lie that ever led to the most honest truth. They danced until the stars came out, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and chosen to build something lasting on the foundation of their shared courage. And if their love story had begun with a contract and a performance, well, the best stories often started with the most unexpected beginnings. 5 years later, as they sat in the same garden with their twin daughters playing at their feet, Brandon and Mackenzie would look back on their journey with wonder and amusement. The weekend that was supposed to solve a simple problem had become the beginning of the most important relationship of their lives. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Mackenzie asked, watching their daughters chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "I try not to," Brandon said, pulling her closer on the garden bench. "I prefer to think about how perfectly they did turn out, even though it started with a lie. Especially because it started with a lie. It taught us that the truth is always worth fighting for, even when it is complicated and messy and difficult." "And what is our truth?" Brandon looked at his wife, at their children, at the life they had built together through honesty and courage, and an unwavering commitment to seeing the best in each other. "Our truth is that love finds a way, even when the odds are impossible. Our truth is that some of the best things in life come from the biggest risks. Our truth is that we chose each other again and again, every day for 5 years, and we will keep choosing each other for the rest of our lives." As the sun set over the garden where their story had begun, Brandon and Mackenzie Hart sat surrounded by the evidence of their impossible, improbable, absolutely perfect love. They had started as strangers playing a role, become partners in an elaborate deception, and ended as lovers who had found their way to the deepest truth of all. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the most unlikely circumstances. Sometimes the greatest risks lead to the greatest rewards. And sometimes, if you are very lucky and very brave, you find someone worth risking everything for, someone who sees you exactly as you are and loves you anyway. That night, as they tucked their daughters into bed and prepared for another ordinary evening in their extraordinary life together, Brandon and Mackenzie knew they had found something that no contract could guarantee and no performance could replicate. They had found real love, built on the strongest foundation of all, the choice to see each other clearly, to forgive each other's imperfections, and to build a future together one honest day at a time. It had taken a beautiful lie to lead them to their most important truth, but every love story, they had learned, begins with someone willing to take a leap of faith. And they had been leaping together ever since. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.